The sea was calm, but inside that calmness there was a quiet tension, something you could almost feel in the air. In the winter of 1935, the Norwegian whaling ship Thordal moved slowly toward the far south. The crew worked with practiced hands, and the cold wind cut across the deck like a thin blade. In the middle of that frozen morning, a woman stood alone, looking out over the water. Caroline Mikkelsen. She was not an explorer, not a scientist, not someone the world expected to see on a journey like this. But she understood the meaning of this voyage more deeply than anyone else on the ship. Antarctica, a place that was almost empty even on a map, a place most people believed they would never see. And for a woman in 1935, it was a destination that felt even more impossible. Yet Caroline was here, quietly breaking a rule the world had never questioned. She had not come simply as someone's wife. Her presence on this ship was not an accident, and not a favor. There was something stronger behind her decision, a quiet determination that showed in her eyes. Every time she looked toward the horizon, below the deck, the crew checked their gear, tightened ropes, and studied the final stretch of the route. Everyone felt the weight of the moment, but Caroline felt something different, a calmness that surprised even her. She watched the faint white glow far ahead and whispered to herself, "Will I really stand there?" The wind brushed her hair, and the cold air filled her lungs with a sharp, almost electric feeling. In that moment, she understood something clearly. This journey was not just a voyage. It was a turning point in her life. And the ship continued forward, quietly but steadily, toward the continent of ice. The night sea stretched out like a dark mirror, and the stars above shone as if someone had gently scattered them across the sky. Caroline stood by the railing, letting the cold air settle around her. As she tried to steady her breath, she knew better than anyone that this journey to Antarctica was not a simple act of following her husband. It was something far more personal. People had questioned her. Why would a woman go there? Antarctica is a place for men. Their words drifted past her like passing wind, but each one left a small spark inside her, a spark that slowly grew into a quiet fire. Caroline had always been someone who observed the world. She wrote down weather changes, the moods of the crew, the shifting colors of the sea. She searched for meaning in small details, and the unknown always called to her. To her, Antarctica was like an unopened book, a story waiting to be read. When she learned her husband would join the expedition, she hesitated for a moment, but the hesitation didn't last. She realized something important. This journey wasn't only his. It could be hers as well. She asked herself, "Why do I want to go?" And the answer came quietly, but clearly, "Because I want to know how far I can go." She wasn't trying to conquer Antarctica. She wasn't trying to prove anything to the world. She simply wanted to leave a footprint beyond the line that society had drawn for her, a footprint made by her own choice, not by anyone else's permission. Below the deck, the crew laughed and talked, their voices mixing with the sound of the waves. Through the cracks of the wooden boards, a cold wind slipped in, sharp, but strangely comforting. Caroline looked up at the stars one more time and whispered softly, "I'm going to write my own story." And at that moment, the vast, untouched page called Antarctica began to open before her. The air was colder than anything Caroline had ever felt, a sharp, clean cold that seemed to rise from the sea itself. She stood on the deck at dawn, watching as a pale glow slowly pushed back the darkness. At first, it looked like fog, a soft, white blur on the horizon. But as the ship moved closer, she realized it wasn't fog at all. It was the continent. Antarctica revealed itself not with noise, but with silence, a silence so deep it felt almost sacred. The ice rose like walls on both sides, blue and white layers stacked over centuries, shining faintly under the early morning light. No one on the ship spoke. The crew, usually loud and confident, moved with careful steps, their faces tight with focus. The sound of the hull scraping against the ice echoed through the air, a slow, heavy sound that made Caroline's heart beat faster. "From here on, we must be careful," the navigator said quietly. His voice didn't shake, but Caroline could hear the weight of experience in it, the kind that comes from surviving places most people never even dream of seeing. She gripped the railing, feeling the cold metal bite into her hands. Her breath formed small clouds in front of her face as she stared at the ice walls rising around them. They weren't just part of the landscape. To her, they looked like the final barrier between the world she knew and the world she was about to enter. The ship pushed forward, slowly breaking through the frozen surface. Ice cracked and splintered, sending small shards into the air that sparkled like glass in the morning light. Caroline held her breath. "Is that the shore?" she asked softly. The captain nodded. "Yes, that's where we'll land." Caroline looked ahead. A wide, endless plain of white stretched out before her, so still that even the wind seemed to hesitate. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that she was standing at the edge of the unknown. She understood then that Antarctica wasn't a place to conquer. It was a place to approach with humility, a place that allowed only a few to step onto its silent ground. And soon, she would be one of them. The wind had grown quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When the ship finally touched the edge of the ice, Caroline felt a strange stillness settle over everything. A stillness so deep it made her heart beat louder in her ears. Antarctica did not welcome anyone. There were no trees, no flowers, no warm breeze to soften the moment. Only ice, silence, and a horizon painted in endless white. Yet within that silence, Caroline sensed a kind of solemn beauty, a presence that demanded respect. "Prepare to land," the captain said softly. Those 3 words moved through the crew like a quiet signal. Ropes were lowered, equipment checked, and a ladder was placed against the ice. Every sound, boots on wood, metal against metal, seemed sharper in the frozen air. Then it was her turn. Caroline stepped toward the ladder, her hands trembling slightly. But the tremble wasn't fear alone. It was the weight of knowing that she was about to do something no woman had ever done before. She climbed down slowly, each step echoing in her chest. When her boot reached the final rung, she paused for a heartbeat and then lowered her foot onto the ice. The cold shot through her instantly, a clean, piercing cold that spread from her foot all the way to her heart. But she didn't pull back. She pressed her weight down, leaving a clear footprint in the snow. She lifted her head. The Antarctic plains stretched out endlessly, so vast and silent that she felt both impossibly small and impossibly strong at the same time. "I really made it," she whispered. Her voice disappeared into the wind, but the moment stayed. She knelt down, touching the ice with her fingertips. It was hard, ancient, and strangely comforting, as if she were touching history itself. Her footprint would soon fade, erased by the wind and drifting snow. But the moment would not fade. Not for her. Not for the world. Caroline Mikkelsen had become the first woman to set foot on Antarctica. And that truth was carved deeper than any mark in the ice. Their time on Antarctica had been short, only a few hours. But somehow, those few hours changed the entire shape of Caroline's life. As she walked back toward the ship, she kept turning around, looking at the footprints she had left in the snow. She knew the wind would erase them soon, maybe within minutes. But to her, they were clearer than any written record. "I did it," she whispered to herself, a quiet smile forming on her lips. It wasn't the smile of victory, but the warm, gentle smile of someone who had finally accepted herself. When the ship began to move away from the shore, the white coastline slowly faded into the distance. Yet Caroline didn't feel sadness. Instead, she felt something like gratitude, as if Antarctica had given her exactly what she needed and was now telling her that it was time to go. She took out her journal and began to write slowly, carefully. Antarctica did not test me. I came here to test myself. Her handwriting shook slightly in the cold, but the words remained steady. In that frozen place, she had learned how to face fear, how to cross the invisible lines that the world had drawn around her, and how to trust the strength she had always carried inside. The crew returned to their routines, and the ship turned north again. But inside Caroline's heart, the silence of Antarctica remained, not cold, but warm in a strange, quiet way, like an echo that refused to fade. She looked back one last time at the disappearing horizon and whispered, "Thank you. You changed me." In that moment, Antarctica was no longer a distant continent. It had become a part of her story, a mark left deep inside her, a memory that would never melt away. As the years passed, that short day in Antarctica began to feel almost like a dream, a memory softened by time. But, strangely, the air she breathed there, the wind that touched her face, and the cold of the ice beneath her feet never truly left her. They stayed with her, quiet and steady, like a heartbeat she could still hear. People did not remember her name for a long time. In the long history of Antarctic exploration, her footsteps were buried beneath larger stories, bigger achievements, and louder voices. Her notes, her feelings, her quiet courage, all of it rested in forgotten journals and dusty shelves. But history has a way of returning to the places where it once whispered. Decades later, as researchers reviewed old expedition records, someone opened a worn, yellowed journal from 1935, and there, written in careful handwriting, was a name that had waited patiently for the world to notice it again. Caroline Mikkelsen, the first woman to set foot on Antarctica. In that moment, the footprint the wind had erased seemed to appear again, not in the snow, but in the minds of those who finally understood what she had done. She had not conquered Antarctica. She had not changed the continent, but she had crossed a boundary that the world had quietly drawn around her. She had stepped beyond it, with calm determination, leaving a path for others to follow. Her step might have looked small to some, but to others, it became a light, a guide toward a wider world. And now, her name rests once more upon the ice, not as a fading mark, but as a story remembered, a story carried in records, in memories, and in the hearts of those who hear her journey. The silence of Antarctica remains deep and cold, but within that silence, the echo of one woman's quiet step still lingers. Her name was Caroline Mikkelsen, and her story continues.